Hey, UNH alumni. My name's Nate Burnitz, and I'm the InfoLine Program Coordinator for UNH Extension. I'm part of the home gardening team, which shares proven tips and strategies for gardening and landscaping with people in New Hampshire. We work hand in hand with researchers and field specialists to ensure Granite State gardeners have access to reliable research-based information, and so we can give recommendations that help gardeners like you save money, steward the environment, and achieve gardening and landscaping success. We're so excited to partner with Alumni Relations to bring you these Wildcat Life videos, and we hope you'll enjoy them. Steve Geddes holds the record in North America for the largest giant pumpkin ever grown, a 2,528-pound gourd grown in his home garden in Boscawen, New Hampshire. And Food and Agriculture Field Specialist George Hamilton organizes meetings and provides expertise to the New Hampshire Giant Pumpkin Growers Association, educational meetings that have now taken place for over 20 years. I'm Nate Burnitz, host of Granite State Gardening, and today both George and Steve join me to share their tips and proven strategies for growing giant pumpkins in New Hampshire gardens and to answer your questions. As we go, comment with your questions on this live video, which is streaming on the Ask UNH Extension and UNH Extension Facebook pages. And just like Steve Geddes smashed the record for the largest giant pumpkin ever grown in North America, smash the like button on this video to help more people see this conversation. Guys, I want to start by asking you about your origin story in growing giant pumpkins. Steve, how did you first get into growing giant pumpkins? And George, how did you first get connected with the giant pumpkin growing community?
Yeah, I never really had an intent to grow giant pumpkins, but probably approximately 12, 13 years ago, this was prior to my being retired, I had a friend and coworker who was actually a very successful giant pumpkin grower here in New Hampshire. At that time, I didn't realize how involved in the fact that there were clubs throughout the country and actually the world. But that friend and coworker, for a number of years, he knew that I gardened. He knew that I had worked on commercial farms in my younger years down in Litchfield. And he just basically harassed me year after year. My response every year was the same, which I thought it was silly. I thought it was foolish to give up garden space and physical effort that was involved in growing them to grow something you're not going to eat. It didn't really seem to really gel with what I like to do. After a few years of twisting my arm and realizing that wasn't going to work, he took the next step, which he just showed up in my office one early June and dropped the plant in a pot, giant pumpkin plant in a pot, put it on my desk and said, Steve, I know you've got a very large garden. Go home, plant it, find some space. It's late in the season as far as for what we do, but plant it and then tell me later what you think. And so I did, and within probably 3 to 4 weeks, I was hooked. There's nothing that I've ever grown or seen that grows aggressively, just the plant, let alone the pumpkin. In that first year, in the first month, I was very, very impressed. The plant was growing a foot in each direction every day once it got established. And then I did get a pumpkin on it. I didn't know what I was doing because I was treating it like what a commercial farmer would do with a winter squash, a blue Hubbard. And in fact, the farms I worked on, I mean, our primary crop was winter squash. So I was familiar with it. But I didn't know some of the tricks, so to speak. But I did have a pumpkin that was 500-600 pounds in the end of August that blew up on me. That's a whole nother story, but that's how I got started. I got absolutely hooked. It was science fiction to me. So yeah, that's what got me started.
Well, as people like Steve started growing them back in the 90s, they would have problems. So
and we still do.
They called their local extension person, which was in Hillsborough County, which was me. And all of a sudden I started to answer a whole bunch of questions with insect diseases and nutrients, because as Steve said, his first one blew up. It seemed like all the guys and gals were blowing up their pumpkins, trying to push them too fast with a lot of nitrogen. So basically at the same time I was doing studies with nitrate testing of soils for regular pumpkins. So I just took that knowledge and applied it to the giant pumpkin growers. And all of a sudden, they listened to me and they weren't blowing up their pumpkins because they were putting on too much nitrogen. So then they believed in me, so that all of a sudden they started asking more and more questions. So back in 2000, we had our first meeting talking about giant pumpkins, and I asked some of the regular farmers in the area to join, and they came back and they had the most fun in a meeting. They said, these guys are crazy. And so that was the kind of the start of it. And we've had a educational event every year since 2000.
Okay, so now that you're both solidly entrenched in the giant pumpkin growing community here in New Hampshire, how would you describe the culture of the community? Or, put another way, why do you love being part of New Hampshire's growing community of giant pumpkins?
I'm going to say it's the fellowship and helping one another. And you can see your toil and all the care you take care for this plant. You can see something growing by it. It's unbelievable walking into a patch and seeing right now 1,000 pound of pumpkin right now and watch it mature through the fall. So I think that is, you see the benefits of what you're doing to see that pumpkin grow, or you can see, oops, I made a mistake.
When George mentioned the fellowship, there really is. I'm not a real big club person. I mean, I've always loved gardening. I love gardening because the solitude, being out there, fingers and toes in the dirt, love that. And I already mentioned that I was very skeptical when I first started. I mean, it took a number of years. And the first year I grew, that it really actually was the second year. It was the second year I actually, again, decided I was going to grow a little bit more seriously. And by the end of August, I had a pumpkin that I really didn't know how to estimate the size, but Peter Carter, who was, again, my coworker that had convinced me, he had been up a couple of times, and he dragged up a person that is known throughout the world. He passed away just a year and a half ago, Jim Kuhn, who was certainly known throughout the world of giant pumpkin growing. And so, I don't know, he brought Jim Kuhn up to my backyard and said, what do you think? And they were all very impressed. And by the end of August, they started asking me, well, what are you going to do with that pumpkin? And my answer was pretty simple. Well, it's whatever the size is, it's too big for me to do anything. I'm not going to eat it, but I'll take the chainsaw out and put it in the compost pile. And Jim Kuhn, nope, he won't have that happen ever. And so he looked at me and said, no, Steve, that's not happening. Your pumpkin's going to one of the bigger way-offs, Topsfield, down in Massachusetts. It's the big way-off here on the East Coast. And so I kind of laughed. I didn't have a truck. I didn't have a tractor to lift it because it was approaching 1,000 pounds, right. At least according to Jim Kuhn. I didn't know, but Jim kept looking at me saying, Steve, that's going to be real close to 1,000, and that's a beautiful pumpkin. And so I laughed and said, well, Jim, I'm not going down. I don't have a truck. I don't have a way to lift it. And said, not to worry. And 4 days later, I get a call, and they had arranged at first for somebody to come up out of Manchester, Robert Demers, with heavy equipment. And I said, no, I've been around heavy equipment. I'm not going to have somebody drive all the way up here to Bosquen with their loader and a trailer. It just didn't make sense to me. And well, they went with the second option. They had a guy come down from Belmont, another grower here in New Hampshire, brought down pallet racks, lifting mechanisms, brought down his own trailer, put the pumpkin on, brought it to Topsfield. I drove down behind him. But that's the idea of the growers, and it's not just New Hampshire, it's throughout the world. And because of the internet now and the ability to communicate, I'm communicating almost daily with growers throughout the world that have questions, that want to chat about something specific in regards to giant pumpkins. So yeah, it's an interesting group.
Yeah. For everyone watching, now we're going to talk about how to actually grow giant pumpkins, and we've got two of the best in the business here to tell us how. What are your questions? Have you ever grown a giant pumpkin or pumpkins at all? What would you like me to ask these guys? I've got plenty of questions. but feel free to chime in and I'll relay those questions. So first, kind of big picture, what are the basic requirements of a growing site, and like how much work is it to grow a giant pumpkin? What's actually involved?
Well, if you're looking at the site, I would like to have minimum of 10 hours of sunlight. We can grow them under that, but if you don't have quality sunlight, I prefer to have a site that has a higher organic content in the soil. So we're going to be modifying it over years to get the organic matter up. So there's good, it has the ability to hold nutrients and hold water. And I would like to have a soil that is well drained versus holds a lot of water. We can always add water if it's a sandy soil, but if it's a heavy soil, and if it's really wet, you can't take water away from a heavy soil. So that's what I'm looking at to tell people what they should. Steve, what do you feel is the most important aspect?
Yeah, well, we usually start, because there's a lot of questions that are very close to what you're asking from people that haven't grown and that are wondering, what's it take, how much space, how much of an investment, financially, time-wise, etc. And my answer is basically that you really should start by saying, what's your goal? What's the end goal? And it would be no different. I've done a lot of running, competition-wise, etc. So I would say, if somebody asked me, what's it take to run a 5K, a 3-mile race? My answer would be almost the same, which is, what is your goal? Is your goal just to finish? Or is your goal to be standing on the podium first, second, or third? Mm-hmm. There's going to be a big difference between the answers. So if all your goal is to have the biggest pumpkin in your neighborhood, or in the 5K race, if all your goal is to finish and have a good time, you don't have to do a lot of effort. You can actually walk, smile, laugh, sing along the whole way, and no pressure. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. On the other hand, if you really want to go to the end, then you better find resources, expertise, folks like George, Extension Service. You got to do your homework, and then also try to maximize all of the variables. So all the things George was listing, very critical. But if you want a 300 to 400 pound pumpkin, you can do it with very little sunlight. There's been some big pumpkins grown and really, big trees. And when I first started, I was surrounded with 100-foot pines and taking a bunch out.
A whole bunch out.
Yep. I've seen people with soil that I don't think would grow a tomato and still grow a 300, 400, 500 pound pumpkin. Wow. I've seen folks that didn't have a lot of space, didn't have a lot of time. Mm-hmm. So it really comes down to what's your goal. Are you going to go to way off, and are you going to be embarrassed if you're one of the smaller pumpkins in the way off? If that's the case, you're probably going to do a lot more work anyway. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on what you're shooting for. The pumpkins have great potential. If you treat them like your summer squash and you give them at least 150 to 200 square feet, pretty reasonable to expect a several 100-pound pumpkin, biggest pumpkin in your neighborhood. So,
George, if you're looking at a kind of blank slate in your garden, you've never grown a giant pumpkin before, can you elaborate on what you were saying just a minute ago on how to prepare that site to get started?
Well, what I would always tell the people is you've got to start a year ahead of time to get the pH up to 6.8 to 7. Mm-hmm. And remember, you're now growing, instead of a 3 to 20 or 25 pound pumpkin, you're growing something that's going to be hundreds of pounds. So you're going to have the nutrients up into the, sweet zone, optimum zone on a soil test, to the high side of optimum, because it's going to take more nutrients to grow that plant or that pumpkin. So doing a soil test, getting the soil pH right, adding organic matter to build up the organic matter level in the soil are all little things you can do. Grow a cover crop there maybe the year before to build up that organic matter are all little tricks to help out. So it's coming up with a system to maximize and make the healthy soil so it can take care of the plant the following year.
Steve, Amy, who's watching, is wondering about your seed starting tips. And I guess the bigger question is, should you start from seed? And when?
Once again, I'll go back to what's your goal. My goal is to grow the biggest pumpkin possible. That, it'd be nice to grow the largest in the world. We all hope for that. But so, my start date, I start generally earlier than almost anybody in New Hampshire. And I'm actually a very cold zone in New Hampshire. So I'm already kind of having problems with a real early start. But I start on April 1st, generally. I start indoors. They're relatively easy to start. They germinate pretty successfully. I have a germination box, and it's not overly fancy, but I can start a lot of plants in it, and we start our tomatoes. We have a lot of starts that get going, but they do wonderfully well starting in a real moist pot and soil. So I always start with sterilized pot and soil. Keep it probably more moist than what most people would suggest, but I keep the temperature right at 85 to 90, plus or minus 1 degree. I mean, it's controlled with an electronic thermostat, digital thermostat. They generally, almost every one of my germinations, the plants popping out of the ground within 72 hours. And I start hundreds of plants. I give out a lot of plants in the springtime. So I start a lot of plants. I only keep 3 for myself. Nothing fancy. I mean, if you go online, there's all types of anecdotal, non-evidence-based tips about how to start your plants. Filing the seeds, soaking the seeds, doing a concentration, whether it's soaking them in seaweed, soaking them in hydrogen peroxide. It's not necessary. I mean, I'm 99% successful with my seeds, all germinating in 72 hours. It's really, I mean, if you can keep them at that critical temp, and what I would say actually 70 to 85, they're going to take a little longer if you're down in the 70 range. But if you drop below and you start falling below 65 degrees, trying to get the seeds to germinate, good chance they're going to sit, especially if the soil is too moist, they'll sit and rot. So we do, most of us that are competitive will start them indoors. I start them in 2-gallon pots, and that seems like a real big pot, but in 2 weeks time, so by April 16th or 18th, my plants are already getting pot bound in a 2-gallon pot. That's how rapid the root growth, and the above growth is also equally rapid. So since they're getting root bound by 2 to 3 weeks, it means you have to get them transplanted. And here in New Hampshire, when you're talking about putting a plant in the garden on April 16th to 18th, that's my kind of window I shoot for. It means you have to have some tricks as far as preparing some heat cables in the ground to have that soil. Just as in germinating the seed that you want the soil above 65, you certainly don't want to put the plant in the ground and have the soil at 55 degrees. You're just gonna, it'll stall out completely, etc. So we preheat our soil with heating cables. We have little mini hoop houses, often 5 by 10 or a little bit bigger, to try to take care of some of those climatic variables.
Now, if I'm not growing the largest pumpkin, just maybe the largest in the neighborhood, I would be probably waiting until the 10th of May and starting it indoors, and then being able to transplant it outdoors the 15th or by the 25th of May. And you'll still be able to get 1,000-pound pumpkin, planting a little bit later. But to get that 26, 25 that Steve had, or whatever the magic number was, you got to really push the envelope in order to get it. And he makes mini greenhouses, actually 2 inside one, in order to keep the temperature up, and he'll even put in heat lamps in there to try to maintain the temperature, because remember, a pumpkin is a warm season plant, so it needs that temperature 62, 65 or above in the soil temperature. If it goes down, they just stop growing, and it takes longer if the temperature goes up, if they've been in the cold soil, versus waiting and putting it out when it's there. So We got to modify the environment if we go early.
So
and I'll go back and say that you can absolutely direct seed. You can wait. I mean, as George mentioned, I mean, a nice way to do it if it's your first year growing, whatever, if you're just kind of into it to get a really large pumpkin, is to wait 2 weeks prior to your frost date, maybe 3 weeks prior to that frost date, wherever you are in New Hampshire or whatever other state. Start your plant indoors and then get it out. But even if you don't want to do that, you can direct seed once your soil temps, just get out with a temperature probe, check your soil temp. If it's up above 64, 65, yeah, direct seed in, and you still, I mean, if things go well, can end up with a 1,000-pound pumpkin at the end of the season. So
we're getting some really good questions here on Facebook. So Georgina wants to know, how late in the season can you start? Presumably now is probably too late. So do you want to address that?
I can right now. I mean, I've been getting it. Even when you start very early, just to share this with you, I mean, it's really about your pollination date that you're shooting for as far as trying to determine how big of a pumpkin you might end up with. It's when you pollinate how many days the fruit has to grow. So a lot of growers may start really early and then have some problems with their pollinations. And I've been getting emails from New Hampshire growers that just didn't hit it on their pollinations and still don't have one pollinated, and are still trying to pollinate, and they will continue. Probably they'll quit attempting once you get into the first or second week of August, but you can still even do a really late pollination first, second week of August if you have a plant that's fairly large, and end up with a 300 to 400-pound pumpkin. If you started one today, you could potentially have a 200-pound pumpkin at the end of the season if your weather held really well, because again, they do grow rapidly once the soil and temps are up. So,
But if we have an early frost, 10th of September, bye-bye.
Yep.
Amy wants to know what seeds or varieties you recommend other than the Dill's Atlantic.
The Dill Atlantic is the basis of the giant pumpkin contest. That is the one that all the growers, and basically the growers have done an unbelievable job of selecting genetics. And there is a web page that a person takes all the different ones grown each year and will list the genetics behind each one. So if you're going to that big record, you got to look at the genetics. But if you're going and wanting just a field pumpkin, there's a whole bunch of different varieties. Showstopper, Howden is another big pumpkin that, you can grow almost any of them. You're going to be looking, I always say, what is your goal? How big of a pumpkin do you want? Then select the variety is going to produce that size type of pumpkin. If you want a tall one or do you want a round one, they'll have different characteristics that you can select for. So look at a lot of the catalogs and see what size you want and select one from there. Actually, there's a lot of varieties of pumpkins that were bred right here at UNH. Dr. Brent Lloyd is one of the top breeders of pumpkins and squash in the world. And he's actually released hundreds of different varieties. So a company like Johnny Select has a lot of his. Rub Seed has a lot of the pumpkins that he's bred out of Ohio. So there's a whole bunch of different places that you can go and find.
Great, and that answers.
What I would add to that, Nate, is that again, if the person was asking specifically about giant pumpkins in regards to the seeds, then I would say don't go online and there are some catalog folks that sell, and you can buy them off eBay, you can buy them off Amazon. I wouldn't suggest that. Again, you New Hampshire grower, actually any grower, you can go onto the New Hampshire Facebook page and it's listed. I believe you have it listed, Nate.
Yep.
You can go on there and just put in a request, and any of us that grow here in New Hampshire will get you some seeds. In that way, you're going to know what you're getting. If you buy something off Amazon that says Atlantic giant pumpkin seeds, you have no idea. You really don't know what it is that you're getting. So there is simple way to get them here.
Great. And Steve just mentioned the links. If you look at the description of this video, there's a footnote section with 4 links. So check those out. Let's move on. There are a few more questions. We can get back to those. What about transplanting? Steve, do you protect your transplants since you're really pushing the envelope in the season?
Yeah, actually, right from the start, from whether it's the seed going into my mix, I'm very careful that, again, as I mentioned, sterilized buttons. So all the way through, we try to control every potential variable that will be a kind of game stopper for the season, and so that certainly, I mean, the transplants are going in. It certainly is not weather that you should be putting any type of cucurbit in the soil here in New Hampshire if you're doing it in April or even early May. And so, as I mentioned, that most of us will run either a 50 or 60-foot heating cable, whether it's a roof heating cable, just a soil heating cable that you can pick up off Amazon. You can pick them up at Home Depot. So we like crazy extension cords running out through the yard. That's probably not really UL approved, but we bury them down in the soil, put them very tightly spaced, so we have at least a 5x5 area that's preheated. So they're protected as far as heat there, and then they're protected in regards to, we do hoop house that, as George mentioned, I have a little mini greenhouse that's a 5x10 that protects it. And then again, because late April, you're going to have nights that get into, down to 25, 26. So even then, I may cover the plants when they're really small before they get 3-4 square feet and down on the ground running, and put another little mini covering over them. The heat generally from the ground, from the heat cables, is enough to keep that little mini environment warm enough to protect them. The big risk of what I do, which is starting very early to try to get a few extra growing days of optimum growing days, the big risk is my plants often outgrow my 5x10 hoop houses, portable hoop houses, early. So now I'm in the middle of May. I pull the hoop houses off, plants are still growing. And I'll use this year as an example. They were growing very well, even though we had cold weather. Inside those hoop houses, we had sunshine and it was warm. And they took off. I had to pull my hoop houses off middle of May. Plants still continue to grow very rapidly. And here in Boscawen on June 1st and June 2nd, we had pretty heavy frost. So,
Georgina is asking about fertilizer requirements. What do they need? I know, George, you had mentioned that was one of the, kind of impetus for you getting into this was, kind of fertilizing issues. And are there any other additives that help grow giant pumpkins? Someone was asking about, I think, kind of using milk possibly. So maybe that's one of those urban legends. I'm not sure, but what do people need to do?
Doing a soil test is one of the first steps. Because of the giant pumpkin growers, if you look at our commercial vegetable list, one of the crops is giant pumpkin growers. So I'll write a recommendation specifically for them, because I'm modifying the recommendations to put on a little bit more. And I also make the recommendations per 1,000 square feet versus an acre. So it gives them a baseline starting point. Now, every single one has their own secret recipe of using something different. Steve uses a more scientific method, where other people will try A through Z for, all these different products. And we just have to look at it to make sure the plant is getting all the nutrients, both micro and minor, in order to grow them the best. And by doing a soil test, we usually can get the micros right on. So to me, I can't tell you to put on 5 pounds of this or 20 pounds of that, because it's based on what the soil has in it, and every soil is going to be different.
And I could just add to that, and I'll go again with the extremes in regards to what's your goal and what do you really hope for in the end. And as George mentioned, I can't agree enough, which is start with a soil test. every single person's backyard, garden area could be greatly different. So from fertilizing, watering, etc., you can't just take advice from somebody. I get asked questions all the time. How much do you water? What do you put down for fertilizer? What do you recommend for me? And my answer to them is, I'm not going to tell you. You can send me a soil test, and maybe I'll give you some suggestions based on that. That will be different than what I do. But yeah, from the very basics, I mean, as George mentioned, if you have soil that has good organic matter and you have a healthy microbe population and the weather's been cooperating with you where it's the soil's been warm enough, the microbes will convert most of the organic matter into usable nutrients. And you know, I've seen some giant pumpkin growers use no fertilizer, have fairly decent soil in regards to, again, the organic matter, et cetera, grow some very large pumpkins. Seen other growers use the traditional old school commercial, which is 10-10-10 pelletized, 20-20-20, using kind of a schedule that used to be used like when I was working on a farm 40 years ago, which is once every 4.5, 5 weeks, you'd go in and you'd lay down a lot of that type of fertilizer, and it would spike up amounts. And, you know, for a week, there'd be optimal conditions, but every other week after that, none of them would be optimal. They'd either be too high or too low. And then you can go to my extreme, which you kind of talked about, which I don't do anything fancy as far as secret ingredients. Most giant pumpkin growers are dreamers. So when they see all the marketed products out there with the incredible promises, they all dream. And unfortunately, they don't turn to folks like George or you, Nate, to say, is that real? And how would that apply to me as a giant pumpkin grower? Instead, I mean, I do use a commercial product. I buy it at one of the local supply stores, Brookdale's in Hollis. It's what a lot of berry growers, anybody doing fertigation, it's a water soluble. Nothing fancy. There's nothing special about it. It has a full complement. It's pretty well balanced for my soil. But the difference is I fertilize daily. Every single day, I fertilize my plants because, as I mentioned, that, you know, if you're throwing that 20-20-20 down every 3 to 4 weeks, you're only got a couple of days of optimums, and the rest of the days aren't optimums. They're high or low. My goal is to try to be optimum every day. So I use in very, very small amounts, amounts that aren't going to burn roots, amounts that are just about, I'm hoping, perfect for the plant in regards to all its needs. And in the end of the season, I'm not using more fertilizer. I'm not using anything fancy. I'm just doing it quite often.
Now, what Steve is doing is, if you put on a lot of fertilizer, you get this real high peak, and then it goes down. So what Steve's doing is we're going little waves so that we keep a more uniform amount. And as the plant goes out, he's using the same concentration, but he's using more because there's more surface area. Now, you said special aspects, maybe using some humus in the soil to get the microbes, but that's why I like to get the organic matter up in the area of 5 to 12, so that if it's up over that 5-8%, putting more humus isn't going to really help you anymore. And a lot of people think, well, that a little bit's good, a little bit more is even better. And I have to tell the story. The first world record in New Hampshire, the 2 years prior to that pumpkin growing, I gave a recommendation to the grower, and he would always double it. And the poor gentleman was sick, so his neighbors came and helped him, and they saw what my recommendation, and Charlie told the one guy, well, I'm going to always double it. He says, well, George said, no, this is what we should do. And he followed the directions, and he grew the largest pumpkin ever at that point, back in 2003, 2004 in that area, 1380, or was it, or something like that. And everybody said, see, you follow directions, it'll grow. So it was a great time seeing that first world record from New Hampshire.
Yeah. So we've hit the half-hour mark. Do you want to keep answering a few more questions?
Works for me.
Cool. Jody was wondering about pollination. Do they need cross-pollination?
No, most growers will have anywhere from 1 to 5 plants. There are some growers that I would put them in the insane category that actually have 20 or 30. I don't know. I don't know how they do it. They certainly can't spend as much time. I mean, I'm working full time on 3 plants, so. But most growers have 1 to 3, and so the growers have the opportunity to make a decision. If you have a plant that from the day one you really like the characteristics of the plant, and even though they're all from the same family, the Atlantic giant family, characteristics of the plant and even the pumpkins, the shape, the color, etc. There's a great difference. I have 3 plants. Their growth habit totally different. All 3 totally different looking pumpkins. One plant is what I would consider the perfect plant to work with. One is a nightmare to work with, and the other is I'm not sure yet. But so if you got a great plant and you like the genetics on it, you can sell. You can take the male flowers from that same plant and you can pollinate the female on that plant. Or if you're looking at the 3, 4 plants you have and you want the characteristics, maybe some characteristics from this over to that plant the following year if you're saving the seeds. So some people will take a look at what they have, the genetic pool, and actually some growers will take the extra step. And so some of the growers here in New Hampshire will know what I have in my patch, and they may not have that available to them. And the night before they have a female, their female pumpkin opening that they want to pollinate, they'll get in touch and say, can I make a run up there? Do you have any male flowers from X plant that I can have that would be opening the following day? And we clip the flowers. And so it's a kind of timing thing. The male flower has to open the same morning as the female. It's only good for that early morning. So there's some opportunities, but no, you don't have to cross-pollinate with a different.
Gotcha. So Michael, Terry, and Becca are all asking about pruning. Questions about, when do you cut all but the main vine? The when and how of pruning.
Do you want to touch on it, George, or?
I'm going to hand that over to you.
Yeah, it's the bane of all growers. I mean, the one big workload. And this is the big difference between commercial growing of a cucurbit, of a winter squash, whether it's a blue Hubbard, banana squash, etc., is that, the commercial grower will just, again, direct plant the seeds, they grow out. And most people, if they did that, and even gardeners growing butternut squash, etc., probably never look at their plants and understand that there's some real symmetry and balance to how a plant generally wants to grow. And when you're growing giant pumpkins and you realize that you can optimize the plant by pruning, you really start seeing what the plant generally kind of leans towards. So the simple start is that, we start, whether you're starting from seed or transplant, the crown of the plant, and giant pumpkin growers will call it the stump, because with a little luck, it'll look like a tree stump in the end. There's a vine that starts from there. We call that the main vine. And then as that main vine finally touches down to the ground, it starts running. And that's what vine crops do, they run. And about every foot, there'll be a leaf node. And on that leaf node, another vine will want to start. There'll be a node and it'll want to send off another vine. We call those vines secondaries. And if you look at the symmetry of it, once that main vine lays down, let's say that first leaf node, it's generally going to be on one or the other side of the main vine, kind of like a 40 degrees off to the left or 40 degrees off to the right. And then that little vine that wants to start there, the secondary, you can easily train it to go 90 degrees off the main vine. So if you can picture that, you've got a big trunk, a big hose running straight and a foot up. You've got the first side vine going to the left. We train it to go perpendicular, 90 degrees off. Next node up, another foot up, which is now 2 feet from the crown of your plant. The next side vine should want to run to the right side, almost perpendicular, and you sometimes have to play around with it to get it. And then it just starts sequencing like that. And so as those side vines go out, and that's the question that's probably being asked, as those side vines go out, we try to get, they start also having leaf nodes every foot. And they look similar to the main vine. They're just now going opposite directions, 90 degrees off. And we try to get those leaf nodes down to the ground as quickly as we can, gently, because they will come up in the air a bit. But once you get the leaf node down to the ground, it will reroot each one of those leaf nodes. So every foot, every direction will send 2 roots down, one directly under, and then there's another node even on top of that vine. That's the top node that will have a root curve around if it's got soil contact. And so we will train those vines out. Now, the workload, and it is a workload, as the plants are in their fastest growth point, at each one of those leaf nodes, another vine wants to start. And as growers, we call those tertiaries. If you let everything grow, it's going to be a jungle. It would just be a mass of things growing straight up over each other, etc. And that's what would happen in a normal field. But we kind of just keep the main vine and the secondaries. And so we let the secondaries, most growers, I like to let mine grow out 12 to 15 feet. I terminate them at that point. And if you look at my plants now, they're filling 1,000 square feet. But if you went up, walked along the side and got down, you could look down between those side vines, and it looks like highways, just like straight lines, which is nice for airflow. It's nice for fertilizing. It's nice for spraying fungicide, pesticides. You have a really kind of open canopy if you want to get down underneath. And the question about when do you, so I terminate each one of those side vines as they get out to 12 or 13 feet. I don't let them get beyond that. There's, in my mind, a point of diminishing returns as far as what the plant is going to return back to the fruit. That's not scientifically based, though. Vineyards and grape growers, they know exactly how far their grapevines go as far as diminishing returns, and they terminate. No one's done a study on giant pumpkins. Some giant pumpkin growers will let side vines grow 25 feet, 30 feet. I cut mine at 15, and in the end, my patch looks like a big rectangle, 30 by 40, 1,200 square feet. I let that main vine grow until probably the end of the summer, or until I run out of space, which will be 40, 50 feet out.
George, do you have anything to add to that? And can you talk about, why and how you bury vines?
Well, Steve explained it very well. I really can't say any much more than that. And the people like to bury the vines for a couple different reasons, for that rooting ability at the nodes. And also by burying the vine, we try to reduce some of the problems with some of the insect problems, so that the insect can't penetrate that vine. It's underground, protected. But squash vine borer still finds it some way, and they'll lay the egg on the leaf and go inside the leaf and go down through the leaf petiole right down in the vine. So it helps somewhat. Some growers do a real good job. Other growers just pin their vines to the ground, and that way when they spray, they can, for fungicides and insecticides, they're also spraying the vine itself. So you can do either or. Steve, what do you do at your, you bury the vine or not?
I do a little mini trenching, and I think the terminology, especially for new growers, it can be kind of dangerous with the concept of burying, because they don't know, they're thinking maybe what, 3 inches, 2 inches. And really, for the plant's sake, the biggest factor is getting dirt on the leaf node, top and bottom, good contact. Just like if you were trying to start a seed, whether it's grass seed, whether it's a tomato seed, direct seeding in, you want good soil contact. And so as long as you have that on the top of the node and lower part of the node to get it to root, then 3 or 4 weeks later, that dirt can wash off, but the roots have established and gone in. And each one of those leaf nodes, and the best visualization I could give to any grower, and this is the reason why the Atlantic giants, I believe, really do what they do, every one of those leaf nodes becomes very similar to a whole separate plant in regards to its ability to pull nutrients. It's not just a taproot, it's a whole fine hair root system. I mean, at the end of the season, well, actually right now, I probably have 100 miles of fine hair roots underneath my plants. I mean, every square inch is, there's nowhere you can look under a plant. It's just a mat of super fine roots. And that's each one of those nodes is rooted in. I could cut off the crown of the plant, and most people go, oh my God, it'd be the end of the growing, but not at all. It may impact the plant slightly, but the plant is being fed by every one of those nodes, the rooting system below. So
I want to just read a question from Becca, who, you know, has a pumpkin that's the size of a beach ball right now. Pretty good. Been trimming tertiary vines and burying the secondary vines. Wondering when to cut all the vines but the main vine, including, does she cut the vines that she has buried? And kind of the last part, by terminating the secondary vines, does that mean cutting them off at the main vine? So a few questions there.
Okay, when we're looking at terminating the vine, we're going out, as Steve said, he's going out 15 feet, 20 feet, and just cutting the tip off, the growing point, leaving the rest of the vine there to bring back the nutrients to help feed that pumpkin and feed the plant. So we are not cutting anything off of the back at the main vine. We're leaving that secondary go all the way out. Steve, do you have any others to say with that?
yeah, as just as George said, that on the secondaries, it's determining, you know, whatever size your garden is, and it works well for me. I mean, I have spaces where each plant can fill in a 30-foot wide space. So, you know, at about 12 feet, I'm terminating because that side vine will continue. The last 3 nodes when I terminate are only, you know, at 4 inches, but each one of those nodes spread out over the next week and a half to a foot. And so that fills my 15 feet. And then the vine will no longer grow, but it'll be rooted there. And it'll continue to be healthy and working for 100+ days, 120 days. And what generally happens, so as I fill my patch, and I usually pollinate, I try to have a pumpkin pollinated on the main vine at 12 to 18 feet. Sweet spot for me, I think, is 14, 16 feet out on the main vine. And so when I go to pollinate, and this year I pollinated early June, I will have just started terminating the first couple side vines, and the next side vine up, maybe just a little short, etc. And as each day goes, I terminated another side vine. But then an interesting biological thing, and George could probably talk about it more than I can. I can do the observation, the anecdotal, as far as what I see happen to all my pumpkins, that I pollinate, if it's a successful pollination, somewhere's around 14 days after I pollinate, the sync to the fruit. The fruit is starting to message that plant that this is a good pollination that's going to take. And there's a message that goes out to the plant that kind of just says, guess what, folks? You know, everything you got, send it this way. And at that point, you know, my side vines prior to that are growing 8 to 12 inches a day. So I'm terminating kind of regularly. But at day 14, 15, after I pollinate, and I have that beach ball sized pumpkin, that's generally when a big sink gets established to the plant. And the plant just does its own shutting down. It slows way down. And I actually look forward to that because I know that that pumpkin is really calling for things. And if I've done things correctly and I've got a lot of plant, I know I'm going to start watching major jumps in the daily weights of the pumpkin. And so I can watch that. And the plant slows down dramatically. The main vine has a bit of more of a sink than the side vine. So that will continue to grow out a bit. But there is some side vines that just don't even start once the fruit sink starts big. And that will continue to about 45 days after I pollinate. And then it's a sad time for me. Some growers mistake it, but at about day 45 after I pollinate a pumpkin, I start going down the backside of the growth curve, and it starts releasing the sink, the messaging to the plant and starts allowing the plant to take some of the resources for itself. And so then the plant and that's where I am right now. This week, I'm at that stage in my pumpkins where the plant's been very slow. The pumpkin daily weight gains have been extremely big. Now I'm starting to see it reverse, and the plant's starting to take off again.
Okay, what is your daily gain on the fruit? How many pounds are they growing a day?
From day 30 after pollination, so I pollinated, as I said, early June. So usually from day 28 to day 30 after pollination, that's where, again, you can just picture a bell curve in your head. If you graph it out, there's the beginning phases of your pumpkin growth. You may be disappointed at day 10. It's somewhere between the softball and beach ball, and it just doesn't look like it's going to grow. Well, there's cell division going on. There's a lot of cell division and not a lot of cell expansion. In other words, the fruit's really developing what it's going to be. And then by day 18, the cell division is slowing and the cell expansion is increasing. You start seeing it. Day 28 to day 30 is where I hit the top of the bell curve. And so if you're going to be up over 2,000 pounds, you need to be doing 40 pounds to 50 pounds a day once you get up to the top of the curve. And this year, a couple of my pumpkins at day 30 to day 45 have been averaging up in the mid 50s, and have just, again, they just hit the 45, 46 days. And I just measured last night, and I noticed that they're still doing very big gains up in the high 40s, which could be weather related. We had some, you get 90-degree days, the growth will slow a bit. If you get real cold days, the growth's going to slow. But it's also, I know, I'm not going to kid myself. I'm on the back side of the curve, and the sink is going to start getting released back to the plant. And so.
Steve even watches the night temperature. If it starts going below 60 degrees, we'll see a decrease in the weights. So we even look at the temperature during the night and help predicting how much weight we'll be able to see increase in the next couple days. So little things like that make a big difference. The year that he had his second largest pumpkin grown in the world, the night temperatures for like a 3-week period was 60 to 65 or higher, and unbelievable gains.
I'm surprised no one's asked this, or at least I don't think they have. How do you weigh the pumpkin as it grows?
Well, giant pumpkin growers are really unique. They have come up with a way of taking 3 different measurements, and they have made these wonderful charts to estimate how much the pumpkin will weigh. So every year at a time of the weigh-off, they make all these measurements and they list them, and they predict how much it's going to weigh. So then they'll adjust the chart for the next year. So, one takes it over the top, another around the stem, and another measurement, and you added them all up and look on this chart for 200 inches, and it'll be approximately this. Then they'll say, well, this family of pumpkins from this goes light or heavy. So then they start to guess, but it gives you an idea, a starting point.
Yeah, the charts that are out there, and what they're really doing is they're kind of coming up with a volume formula in regards, and there's an average, and that's a key word, average density, most likely at Atlantic giants. Some may be a little more dense, some may be a little less dense, and will be lighter on the scale, but plus or minus 3%, which is pretty impressive. So you can really gauge, and when you're doing it, I measure every 5 days and do a 5-day average, and that's probably pretty accurate. It's probably much closer to 1 or 2% of really what the weight is.
But remember, a plus or minus 3% on a 2,000-pound pumpkin is going to be 120 pounds difference from the top to the bottom. So once you get up those high numbers, that difference is more than people may think of, a couple pounds.
Yep.
You know, we're looking at hundreds of pounds.
A few people are commenting like, holy moly, that's crazy, and that kind of sums it up. Can you talk a little bit about positioning the pumpkin as it grows?
Yeah, growers do spend a lot of time, and once again, I'll go back to the thing I started kind of the program with, which really depends on what your end goal is. So if you're really shooting for, let's say, a pumpkin that's going to be over 1,000 pounds, then I would say positioning the pumpkin from early on, even picking sometimes the fruit and making a decision whether that tiny little fruit that's the size of a golf ball and flower hasn't opened yet. You can take a look at the stem direction, and ideally, so most of us want a pumpkin that's growing off the main vine, not a side vine. It's just a bigger trunk, probably easier to get more nutrients. But so when we look at that little pumpkin, we take a look at the stem and what angle is it coming off the main vine? Is it a 90-degree angle? Is it, completely perpendicular? Is it a 45, or is it almost running parallel to that main vine? And the reason why that's critical to be looking at early on is I mentioned that, during the peak growth period, average pumpkins 25, 30, 35 pounds a day. Well, when they're in that 100, 200, 300 pound range, that's actually massive growth differences, and they're growing backwards and frontwards equally. And if you don't have a good position of that little pumpkin right from the start, you can start growing up over the main vine and having problems. Now, if the pumpkin's never gonna be over 400 or 500 pounds, probably not a big deal. I mean, I've gotten calls from growers that have never grown and just threw seed kind of in and had a 400, 500, 600 pound pumpkin that, just vines everywhere, and they still got this massive pumpkin. It still worked for them. It may not, though. I mean, they could have lost the pumpkin, but the more serious you take it, the more you focus right from the start. So basically what I do when I pick that pumpkin, I'm hoping it's a long stem. But again, the genetics, some of the pumpkins have, again, I have 3 different pumpkins, 3 different plants out there. One longest stem I've ever had, which I generally lose on that little gamble, which I usually end up with very short stems. But I had one nice long stem, which I was thrilled about. One a medium size, and one that was only 1 inch long. And so early on, once I decided on those pumpkins, as soon as they became the size of a softball, had a little weight, and were sitting on the ground, if the stem wasn't at a 90-degree angle each day during the warm part of the day, you can move that pumpkin 5, 6 degrees towards that 90-degree angle and start shaping it and getting it in a good position. So I'm not sure if that's what the grower was asking about when they're really small. So that's positioning pumpkins when they're really small, and you get them at that 90-degree place, and you're good for the next 3 to 4 weeks. But then once they hit day 25, now, as I mentioned, they're growing backwards and frontwards at a very rapid rate. And you really, if you want to make it to the end of the season with a 1,000-pound plus pumpkin, you need to start taking pressure off what's pushing backwards on that main vine, because it'll pop the stem right off. So we start lifting the main vine. We have to sometimes cut roots underneath a few of the nodes left and right of the pumpkin stem and start lifting it and supporting the main vine. But we also need to pull the pumpkin forward because it's been growing backwards and starting to apply a lot of tension. And so you start, and that's nice and fine until the pumpkin's 150, 200 pounds. And then it's, well, what do you do then? And I don't think I sent a picture to you, Nate, but just this week, I mean, my pumpkins are quite large now, but I mean, I had to get a come along, a basic, big anchoring point, big strap, and gently nudge my pumpkins away from the main vine another inch or 2. I have to do that about every 5 days. Otherwise, they're just going to snap the stems off.
Steve, do you do anything to protect your pumpkins as they grow, especially once they're at a larger size?
Yeah, I'm a minimalist in regards to a lot of things. I mean, the products I use, I mean, early on, George was talking about all the secret formulas. I mean, as I mentioned, use standard commercial fertilizer. I might add boron or something based upon my soil test. Right. So pretty simple there. I don't go crazy like some growers do. a lot of other growers will build a kind of shelter to create a shade space, as well as maybe keep rain and even hail off the pumpkin itself, and especially UV, the sunshine. They're expanding out so quickly. I mentioned 50 pounds, 55 pounds a day. That's an incredible amount of expansion. You want the skin of your pumpkin to be very pliable, and not unlike humans, sunlight kind of damages the skin, and the top surface of the pumpkin, the cells will start actually dying off and get kind of tough, rigid, ligneous, leathery. And if you have those kind of expansion rates, you start getting splits, little splits that may not end your season, but you chase them the rest of the season. That can, a pathogen can get in, a bacteria, fungus, etc. I keep it real simple. I use bed sheets. Early on, much to the chagrin of my wife, when I was, going through the cupboards going, oh, I think we can use these bed sheets. But the pumpkins have all their own bed sheets now. I usually use a couple of layers. Early on, you can go with a twin, then you got to go, full size queen. I'm up to king size, which is I'm happy about right now. And the only negative is that, you get a day like today. I changed the sheets this morning. I brought them in, dried them off, put another set on, but now I got to go out after this and pull those wet sheets off and throw on a dry set. But.
Well, fitting you would be using the king size sheets there, Steve. George, kind of going off Steve talking about, the possibility of pathogens, fungus, what insects and diseases do you recommend growers watch out for? And do you have any kind of basic tips there?
Well, to me, the insects are a little bit easier to deal with. Diseases, there's a whole bunch of different ones, and it's a lot harder to really talk, because we have to look at the dynamics of each individual area. But with insects, we start out with striped or spotted cucumber beetle, or when we usually the 1st of June in that area. Then we have squash bugs that come in. Usually we don't see them until after the July 1st, July 4th, but 1st of June this year, they were out wicked early. And then I have a special project. I work with all the growers dealing with squash vine borer. And to me, that's the silent killer, that the female lays an egg on the leaf stem, that egg hatches and it bores into the stem or into the leaf petiole, and you don't know it's there. And all of a sudden you have a whole vine starting to die out, and you can, dig it out, and right there it is. So by having a trap, we can monitor to see what the dynamics of the population, and do they need to do extra control or not. Diseases, powdery mildew is one that we really have to watch out for. Again, this has been an early year for powdery mildew. Downy mildew is blown into the area, so we have a web page that I watch religiously every Monday, and if it's the disease is in Massachusetts, I'll send out a notice to the growers that are on the squash vine. Okay, downy mildew, you got to do a better job of protecting. Go to a better type of material that will do a better job on downy mildew. But there's a bunch of bacterial diseases we have to watch out for, from angler leaf spot, and a couple other ones that will get into the vine. And if cut into them, we can really smell rank. It's usually a bacterial. Then there's a couple other fungal diseases, gummy stem, anthracnose, that we have to watch out for. But we got to see what the dynamics of that individual patch is, and then come up with a program that will do a good job of controlling, or doing a good job of getting rid of all the plant debris, not having a bunch of other pumpkins in the area. If something gets sick, you remove it immediately. You might take off a couple leaves that the powdery mildew got ahead of you, so that it doesn't create the inoculum to get the whole plant. Steve, do you have any other items to throw in, Steve?
No, what I would say is, if the person's looking at or has just started growing giant pumpkins or plans on it, that if they've grown other squash, pumpkins, etc., whatever they faced in their area, to insects and disease, will likely be the same things that they're going to struggle with or be successful with giant pumpkins.